Hello there hollows and welcome to another video, which is going to be my review, or my initial impression review, I should say, of Remnant 2. Now, this review is from about 10 hours of gameplay, so that's why I'm calling it an initial impressions review. I wouldn't say I've played enough of the game to know 100% my concrete opinions on what I think about it, but I think I've got a good enough idea of what the game is offering now that I can generally give a recommendation on whether I think it'd be worth playing. Now, first of all, I think I have to say that the first initial hour of this game is just rubbish, in my honest opinion. I think it really does a terrible job of making you want to keep playing. It really just, it is not a good first hour. And at the beginning of this game, I was having some serious concerns, honestly, and I was thinking, this game, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure whether it's got it, you know, but then after the first hour, it really does pick up when you actually get into the proper gameplay loop and you realize what it is this game is about. That's when you really can start to enjoy yourself, but that initial hour is just so weak. I honestly feel like the developers should consider going back and doing some changes, because on top of that, the graphics in that initial hour, any kind of in-game cinematic, are really bad in Remnant 2. I mean, the graphics are incredibly poor and the performance is just unacceptable, in my personal opinion, for a 2023 release, which is exclusive to the Xbox Series X, PS5 and PC as well. There is no excuse for the graphics to be that bad that they look like you're talking the early Xbox One games. The graphics and the performance as well, like I said, is just terrible. It's absolutely atrocious. Now again, I'm talking about the in-game cinematics. Take note of that. I preface this by saying the in-game cinematics. The in-game cinematics are what are bad, because the gameplay is actually fine. The gameplay runs at a rock solid 60 frames per second on its balance mode, and even has uncapped frame rates in the performance mode, which is really cool to see. The graphics, even in HDR 4K, still look really good and really sharp in the gameplay sections. The gameplay sections is fine, but it's those in-game cinematics, because we're not talking pre-rendered cutscenes. Not pre-rendered cutscenes, it's all in-game cinematics here, because it uses your character that you've made in these in-game cinematics, and they do look really bad. I mean, there is so much screen tearing. The very first shot when I clicked to play this game, like literally the very first thing I saw when I clicked to start a new game of Remnant 2, the graphics hadn't loaded in properly and it started popping in front of me straight away. That's the very first shot. The screen tearing is actually just the worst I have ever seen on any video game. It's honestly just terrible. It's absolutely appalling, and it took me out of literally the first hour. This is one of the reasons why I was really struggling with that first hour of gameplay, because it was just so bad. I mean, wow, the faces of the characters as well, there's just really not animated well. It looks really just rubbish, and the characters as well, they all look terrible. Honestly, there's so much like, you know, textures that are clipping in through, like clothing that's clipping through stuff, and it all just doesn't look good. Now, graphics aside, let's get into a little bit of the game's story then before I start talking about the gameplay a little bit more. The story, again, is also really bad. Again, I'm getting all the negatives out of the way first before I can start getting into the positives, because this game does have a lot of positives, but I just want to get through the negatives first. The story is terrible, in my opinion, and this again is also going through that first hour, because the first hour is those really bad graphics combined with a story which is just not compelling, has so many cliches, and it's just poor writing. Things the characters are saying is not good. All the voices, in my opinion, for your main character are bad. The performances are just not very good. The voice acting is not good as well for your main character. The other characters, the voice acting actually is okay, but your main character's voice is not good. And in the gameplay as well, your character constantly repeats the same lines of dialogue after you clear a room of enemies. All the time, the same lines over and over again, and there's no option to mute your character's voice either. Because if you turn off all the voices, then you get no voices at all, even for other characters for important story moments. So that's just not good. And like I said, yeah, the story in the first hour was very poor. Luckily, there's not much story in this game once you get into the actual gameplay, which is why it kind of baffles me that they just front load the game with loads of story for the first hour, which you have to get through to get to that gameplay experience, because it really would probably turn a lot of people off. I mean, the story, like the first scene of this game is your character with pretty bad graphics and screen tearing all the time, talking to this other woman who is a plank of wood woman who is just like, her voice acting is bad as well, and you're just going through this world looking for the ward. I'm thinking, okay, we've seen this before a million times in other kinds of games, and it just the tutorial as well is not good, and you're just basically on rails walking down a linear path for about the first hour of this game. You're just going from point A to point B with a couple of shooting moments here and there, and it just reminded me of the most linear, generic third-person shooter from the 2010s. That's what this game felt like in the first hour. And there's even moments where you've got to walk with a character talking, and they're just dumping exposition on you for about 10 minutes while you're walking at a snail's pace down a corridor. I'm just thinking, I don't give a shit about any of this. I want to get to the main gameplay. And now on to the positives, because the main gameplay in this game is good. It's really good. It is really good. It's just getting through that first hour of shit. And then when you get to the game, it is good. There's a lot of great stuff here, but this is one of the reasons why I really would highly urge, if some miracle happens and a member of the development team sees this video, please do something about that first hour of gameplay. Even give me the option to skip it or something, because it's so poor. But I also think it's going to turn off new players, because people that come and play this game, there's a lot of people now. There's that many games out there. They've got so much choice that if a game isn't appealing to them in the first hour, they're just going to go to something else. And they're not going to see all the great things this game has to offer. Because this game does, in my opinion, it does a phenomenal job of blending Souls-like mechanics with, in my personal opinion, like a Gears of War type experience. It's like a hybrid of Gears of War and Dark Souls combined together, because it's got some great mechanics that work well in both of them. The shooting is really good. It's really responsive. It feels fantastic, the shooting does. All the different kinds of weapons as well, they do a fantastic job. There's loads of really cool quality of life things as well, which I really like in the shooting experience. Like, you can switch shoulders that you're aiming with by pressing the left stick, which I really liked and really appreciated. It's not something I would use, but it's a good feature to have there. There's absolutely loads of settings as well in the controls options to customize things, change things to how you want them, which I really appreciated as well, because that is great, and I did use some of them as well, which is really good to see. There's even some really small things in the shooting experience, like how there's a tiny little dot which is displayed on the screen, which lets you know if you're shooting in a gun's ideal range. So if you're using a shotgun or a rifle, all that kind of stuff, there's a dot on the screen that shows if you are in that gun's ideal firing range, so you're getting the most damage with that weapon at that specific range, which is a really good quality of life feature that I never really would have thought to add to a game. And that's really cool. Now, again, like I said, this game does also have a lot of Dark Souls mechanics as well. So it's got traditional bonfires, essentially, that you see in Dark Souls, which are called something. I think they're just called checkpoints, actually. I think they're just called checkpoints in this game. And so every time you rest at them, it resurrects all the enemies. This game does have stamina, but I personally feel like that's something that I don't kind of necessarily understand why it's there, because the stamina system in this game only really relates to dodging or sprinting. So using your melee weapon or using your guns doesn't affect stamina at all, which, okay, makes sense, it wouldn't work with guns. But I feel like the stamina sometimes just felt like it wasn't really necessary. Now, I get that they probably have it there to put a cap on how many times that you can dodge. However, I would argue that, especially in boss fights, the main thing which is almost acting like a stamina system in a way is reloading. Because you have to manage your reloading in a similar way to how you sort of have to manage your stamina in Dark Souls in this game. So having stamina there is only ever really putting a cap on dodging, but I personally feel like you don't need to put a cap on dodging anyway, really, in this kind of game, because the way it sort of works is a bit different, and the way bosses work is sometimes a bit different as well, because it's more focusing on, you know, guns as opposed to melee weapons and melee combat. So, but you do have options for melee combat as well. However, I feel like that's really not the focus here. The main focus is on guns, obviously, as opposed to melee combat, which I think is really good to see, because again, this is the only game I've ever seen which is, in my opinion, I'd say a successful Souls-like, where it is in most ways this is a good game. This is generally a good game. I would recommend people play this if you know, I'll be coming to that later, and this is the only game that I've ever seen do that, but it's also strange that it is its own thing. This is, I wouldn't say there's a game out there that is like this, really, because it is a unique experience, because Dark Souls has got some mechanics of this, yes, but not all of them. Gears of War, again, for example, has got some mechanics that we see in this game, but again, not all of them. So this is kind of its own unique creation, and I really do like that, and I really appreciate that, and I think it's a really good thing that we've actually got a game, in my opinion, that I would say is a good, successful Souls-like, finally. Now, I know you could say, like, Hollow Knight, okay, Sultan Sanctuary, okay, those kind of games, yes, but I feel like those are very distant from this kind of game. This is more like a AAA experience, well, I wouldn't say AAA, but it is more of a big-budget experience. You can see when you play the game, it's got more money, you know, that's been spent on it, and it's made by Gearbox, it's published by Gearbox, which is a big, major publisher, so that's really good to see. To be fair, I haven't played Steel Rising. That could be good. I do really want to play Still Rising as well, because that game, there's so many good things about that game. I really want to give that a go. And Life of Pi is coming out soon as well. Anyway, Life of Pi? Life of P. It is Life of P, not Life of Pi. I say Life of Pi. Anyway, going on a tangent. I want to get to another negative, though, because I've been praising the game for too long now. I need to think of some other negative. The enemies, I think, are something that I do feel will end up hindering the replayability of this game. Because, again, I actually bought the original Remnant a couple of days before I bought Remnant 2. And I haven't had much of a chance to play that much of it, but I did play a bit of it before Remnant 2 came out. And I feel like, I don't know if it's an issue in the original Remnant, because I haven't played enough of it, but I do feel like there needs to be more enemy variety. Now, there is a lot of enemy variety in Remnant. There's a lot of enemy, there really is. There's lots of different types of enemies, but the issue is, they all look the same. And that's an issue. It really does mean that you start to sort of get bored quicker than I would do if the enemy design was changing and looking different. Because I feel like every enemy is just grey and red all the time, which really does start to get old. That constant red in every single environment, generally, when you encounter the enemies, really does start to get old, and I feel like this game does need a lot more enemy variety, in my personal opinion, because it does get samey pretty quick. Now, I think that is pretty much most of the things that I would like to say, aside from the fact that I really like the different builds in this game. Lots of different classes, which is really cool. This game is, they say it's built primarily for co-op. However, all my time spent with this game was solo. But if you are going to go and play this game solo, I would highly recommend you play it on the main difficulty, the normal difficulty first. This was recommended to me by one of my subscribers. They said to me that veteran difficulty is probably what you'd gravitate towards as a Dark Souls player, but they said no, don't go for veteran difficulty, go for normal difficulty, because this game is a bit challenging in some places, especially when you get towards the end of the game. Or not the end, I haven't got to the end of the game yet, but especially when you get towards the later parts of the game can get challenging, so it's probably best to play on normal difficulty first, because veteran difficulty is definitely a big challenge. Apparently, it's a bit too much of a challenge if you're solo, because the game is built to be a co-op experience, so therefore playing normal difficulty on solo is still effectively playing hard, apparently, from what I've heard. I haven't played with other people, so I can't really vouch for that, but that's what I have heard. So anyway, currently, I would say I'm going to give this game a 7.5 out of 10. I think it's a strong game. There's a really strong foundation here, but I do feel like there's still room for improvement with this game in a lot of regards, but it's still a good game. It's still above average, can I say. It's close to being a very good game. That 8 out of 10 is where I'd say the game is very good. But I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. It's close. It's really close to that point, but it's not quite there yet. And I think maybe with some patches, if they work on that opening hour and sort out some of the screen tearing and performance issues, I think this game could be very good. With DLC as well, or expansions, if they add in some new areas, some new environments, some different kinds of enemies that look very visually different, I think we're looking at a great game here. The bosses as well, I haven't really mentioned the bosses. The bosses are really good in this game, for the most part. There's a few duds here and there, obviously, there is in most games, but I think when the bosses are good, they are very good. I think the boss of the first world, the something Ravager, I think, Ravager, he's really good. That, to me, that's the point in the game where I think the game sort of changes a bit and it becomes better. That's like, so once you beat the first world, I think that's towards the end of the first world, that's when the game starts getting very good, and then it stays consistently being good from then on. So that boss is really good though. I really enjoy that boss, and I loved, because the dodging is one thing that's really prevalent in this game still, which I wasn't sure if they'd be able to do with it being a shooter, but you still need to dodge all the time in this game, and the dodging is very satisfying, which is really good. So anyway, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, if it was good enough, thank you again for watching. This is Saul signing out. Have a good one.